Hey there, Heather, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video. And you'll be asking yourself, why the freak are you wearing a hat? Well, obviously, wearing the Blue Jays hat. Because today we're going to be looking at the top 10 Blue Jay post season moments of all time. I think I did a top 10 Blue Jays moments of all time. If you want to look at the top 10 regular season moments of all time for the Blue Jays, yeah, I'll probably do one shortly. But yeah, this is the top 10 postseason moments of all time. I kind of did this list in 2025 last year with the Blue Jay moments, but of course, we all know about the 2025 run to the final when we got George Springer hitting that 3-run home run in Game 7 against Seattle that sent us to the World Series, and then losing in Game 7 to the Dodgers, which was, pissing me off, all that. I don't know if you guys are okay with me having the over my eyes, but yeah, I'm fine. All right, so anyway, let's talk about the top 10 postseason moments in Blue Jay history. I'll probably just do the top 10 regular season moments whenever possible. I'm not under any rush. Anyway, all right, here we go, guys. Number 10 is the 2025 World Series Game 1. There's another one to talk about 2025 in the World Series, but you always remember your first. So, Game 1 of the 2025 World Series had bone chilling anthems, both American and Canadian national anthems. So it was like amazing that, they give like Fox gave props to Toronto for that Oh Canada thing, and Pharrell Williams and his choir was part of it. So, Mr. Happy. Anyway, so we have ourselves Game 1 of the World Series. And everyone was nervous because, the Blue Jays taking on those pesky Dodgers. I had a feeling the Dodgers were going to win the NLCS against the Brewers because the Brewers seem to never get to the World Series. They've only been once in 1982. And let's not forget about Shohei friggin' Ohtani, who was supposed to be in Toronto, but definitely not. Well, regardless of that, the Blue Jays got themselves in and pulled off a 9-5 win in Game 1, which was shocking. I mean, Addison Barger coming in off the bench with a pinch hit grand slam. You don't see those every day. Like a grand slam is one thing, but a pinch hit grand slam? You did. Addie Barger hit a tater tot, and it was over. The Toronto Blue Jays got a pinch hit grand slam, won Game 1 of the World Series, and it looked like it was going to be a decent time. Maybe the Blue Jays do win the World Series and screw over the Dodgers and all that. Number 9 is Bobo Black Sheep Bichette's home run in Game 7 of the World Series against the Dodgers. So the Dodgers won Game 2, won Game 3 in 18 innings. Game 4 and 5, the Blue Jays shocked everyone, especially Game 5, hitting those back-to-back home runs by Schneider and Vladdy Jr. to make it 3-2. So it looked like the Jays just needed to win one game on home turf. We were coming back home Game 6 on Halloween night, and then all of a sudden, down by a few runs, that ball that just snuck in under the padding of that left field wall. If it moved 1 inch more to the left or the right, that would have been a live ball, and maybe we score a run or two. But unfortunately, the rules were a dead ball, ground rule double. Almost every stadium has those things, and it cost the Blue Jays as second and third with no outs. We couldn't score, so basically we had to go to Game 7. And Bo Bichette came up in the fourth inning, hit a 3-run home run off Ohtani's son of all people, and it looked good. The Blue Jays were going to win this thing. And, okay, Game 6, no problem. But then the Jays started choking away. They were up 4-2, and then they gave up that back-to-back solo home runs in the 8th and the 9th, especially to Miguel Rojas, who had not had a hit in October. And all of a sudden, he hits a home run off Jeff Hoffman and ties the game at 4. Blue Jays would give up a run in the 11th thanks to Will Smith's home run, not the Fresh Prince. But anyway, the Blue Jays had a chance in the bottom of the 9th, but they were just a foot short. And a lot of people said he should have slid more because that would have, if he crossed the plate, that would have won the game. But it wasn't. It wasn't meant to be for the Blue Jay fans. And our 2-0 mark in the World Series drops to 2-1. And now only the fucking, excuse my language, but are 2-0 or better in the World Series. Number 8 is Josh Donaldson's winning run in Game 3 of the ALDS against the Rangers. So it's 2016. Not 2015. Blue Jays did play the Rangers in 2015, but this is the rematch in 2016. As the Blue Jays actually had to win the wildcard game, and we'll talk about that later, to face Texas, who were the 1 seed. Toronto went into Texas and blew the roof off Texas, getting to Game 3 on home turf. All they needed to do was win one of the next 2 games. They would be golden. And then in the 10th inning, I didn't see this game live. I was actually at my parents' place for Thanksgiving things. Canadian Thanksgiving, I must add. Uh, there was a wild play, and then the Rangers were hoping for a double play that would have killed it, but they got the out at second, but then Odor threw wide at first base, and then Josh Donaldson decided to have the presence of mind, sprint from third to home, and score ahead of the throw. And the Blue Jays had swept the Rangers with that 7-6 win. But what was even more impressive was that sign that the fan brought on the outfield wall. It said, "I'd rather be punched in May than knocked out in October." You know, this was when Rudy Odor punched out Jose Bautista when the Blue Jays and Rangers played in the regular season in May. But the joke was on Texas because the Blue Jays knocked out the Rangers and swept them, though, too. And practically, saying that, rather be hurt, but then rather be knocked down in October. And I would have went, if one word, if a sign is worth 1,000 words, that sign's worth 1,100 words. So speaking of that wild card match, number 7 is the wild card in 2016. Edwin Encarnacion saves our bacon. The Blue Jays were in a tight position. They shocked the Boston Red Sox and found out that Baltimore lost. Blue Jays and Baltimore were going to play the one-game wildcard game back when the 4 and 5 seeds would face each other in a one-game playoff to get to the postseason. But then the Blue Jays had to face Baltimore. Luckily, the Blue Jays had a head-to-head advantage against Baltimore, so that meant the Blue Jays got to host that one-game wild card. It was a tight game, 2-2. One fan actually threw a beer can at one of the Baltimore outfielders and got himself booted. Or was that Texas? Well, it was either or. But yeah, anyway, Jays and Orioles were tied 2-2 in the 11th. Jays got 2 men on, and Andrew Encarnacion came up against Ubaldo Jimenez. Whereas they could have used their closer, Zach Britton, but I think Baltimore was saving him for a run. Of course, no ghost runners in this position, but Edwin took the first pitch from Jimenez, hit it deep to left field. That would have been deep for a sac fly, but screw that. It's a 3-run home run, and the Blue Jays won the game 5-2 and would face Texas and sweep them. So that would have started a magical year for the Blue Jays. Unfortunately, though, Cleveland screwed with us with their bullpen. Number 6 is Ed Sprague's off the bench heroics in Game 2 of the 92 World Series. Game 1 of the 92 World Series saw the Blue Jays lose to Tom Glavine and co. 4-1. However, Game 2, David Cone, who we pilfered from the Mets for Jeff Kent, actually worked out decently for both teams. Were close. They were down 5-4, headed 4-3, headed to the top of the ninth. And then with a runner on Ed Sprague coming off the bench, he was the backup third baseman to Kelly Gruber. And then he came up against Jeff Reardon, who was a fireballing closer who they picked up from Boston. Atlanta picked up from Boston in the 92 season. Unfortunately, though, he smoked a 1-1 high pitch, and Sprague hit it to left field over the wall, and the Blue Jays were up 5-4 and hung on in Game 2. So Ed Sprague came off the bench. And what's even more crazy is that his wife, Kristen Babs Sprague, was actually a U.S. Olympic synchronized swimmer who won gold after a judge's error ruined Sylvie Frechette of Canada, although Frechette would get a duplicate gold medal 18 months later. Number 5 is Robbie Alomar's home run in 1992 in the ALCS. The Blue Jays got to the 92 ALCS. They had to win on the final weekend against the Tigers to get past Milwaukee and Baltimore. The Blue Jays would be up 2-1, headed to Game 4. They were down 6-1. They did claw back to make it 6-4, but Eckersley made a heroic play on the 8th inning and then basically gave a massive fist pump towards the Blue Jays dugout. The Blue Jays were pissed. And the top of the ninth, with a runner on, Robbie Alomar took a 2-1 pitch from Eckersley deep to right field, gone, tie game at 6. It wasn't the first time Eckersley gave up a massive home run like that. Kirk Gibson. Anyway, that did tie the game. The Blue Jays had to win in the 11th inning, 7-6. They were up 3-1. They lost Game 5, but they won Game 6 on home turf and got to the World Series for the first time in team history. More on that later, of course. Number 4 is the Bautista bomb of Jose Bautista, 2015. The Blue Jays in 2015 were crappy. They were 50-51 at one point. It looked like the Jays were going to miss the postseason. They had not been to the postseason since 1993 when they won the World Series. Especially after, the postseason expanded to 10 teams by 2025. 5 in the AL and 5 in the NL. But then the Blue Jays went on a massive rally, not only came to the playoffs, but won the AL East outright, and then would face the Texas Rangers. The Blue Jays would have home field against the Texas Rangers in 2015, lose the first two games. I basically said game, set, match. Blue Jays just choked. At least we got the World to the playoffs for the first time in 22 years. Lo and behold, the Blue Jays went into Texas and took them down twice, setting up a big game 5 on a Wednesday, October 16, 2015. Blue Jays were trailing, and then came the controversial play when Aaron Sanchez was pitching. As Russell Martin was throwing the ball back to Sanchez, it struck Shin-Soo Choo's bat, and the umpire said it was a dead ball, but the rules were that because Choo's bat did not cross the plate, that ball was a live ball, and Texas took the lead. The fans hated it and basically trying to play it under protest. However, in the bottom of the seventh, 3 massive errors by Texas loaded the bases. Blue Jays did chip away and tie it, and then down by 1. And then Jose Bautista with runners on first and third against Sam Dyson came up and hit a 3-run tater tot to left center field. That was gone, and you could tell on the Fox broadcast, the broadcast cameras were shaking and all that. Back then in 2015, there was no Canadian feed of the playoffs thing. It was just Fox's feed. And practically the fans went bonkers. Of course, the Rangers thought the Blue Jays were egging people on when they were raising their arms like this. However, it was to try to quiet the situation down. Texas and Toronto didn't like each other. Ozuna punched out the guy in the top of the knife, and the Blue Jays were going to the ALCS. Sadly, though, Kansas City took us out in 6 games. Number 3 is George Springer's home run 2025. You knew it had to be up there, but yeah. The Blue Jays in 2025, it was amazing. They shocked everyone. They beat the Yankees on tiebreak head-to-head. The critical part, I think the TSN turning point was Canada Today. The Canada Today 4-game series against the Yankees, which we swept the Yankees, and it brought the Blue Jays closer in the second half. Jays luckily swept the Yankees because they were tied for first in the AL East, and then on head-to-head they did it. The Blue Jays would wait for their next opponent, either the Yankees or Boston. Yankees took care of Boston, Yankees Toronto. Great rivalry. Flight of Guerrero, grand slam. Blue Jays up 2-0. Lost game 3 on an Aaron Judge home run, but thankfully game 4, Jays won. Then went to face Seattle, our old expansion rivals, because both Toronto and Seattle had teams in 1977. Seattle because of a court problem, because, they took Seattle out for Milwaukee, and Seattle threatened a lawsuit. They needed a new AL team. Washington was supposed to get one, but Toronto, after losing the Giants to San Francisco after another thing, actually got the AL expansion team because Muriel Kaufman, the wife of Kansas City owner Ewing Kaufman, sold Ewing on Toronto because Muriel was a Toronto native. So Toronto would take on Seattle in the ALCS. Seattle had never been to the finals. Toronto was 2-0. Anyhow, it was back and forth. Seattle was up 3-2, headed back to Toronto for game 6. Jays survived, and then game 7 on a Monday night on home turf. They were down 3-1, Basardo on the bump, and then George Springer with runners on first and third. Springer could not play the outfield. He was hurt, so he was DHing. Whacked a pitch from Basardo, a 1-0 pitch to left center, deep and gone. Blue Jays win 4-3, go up 4-3 and win the game and got us to the World Series in the first place. That was critical. I know it's better than Bautista's home run because Springer's home run got us to the World Series. Bautista's got us to the ALCS. Number 2 was winning the whole damn thing in 1992. The Blue Jays were 1-1 going home for the first World Series game in Canada. There was controversy in a sense, but the American Marine Corps wanted to raise the Canadian flag, and the Mounties would do the U.S. flag. Only because, for some effed up reason, the flag in Game 2 and for Canada was upside down. Why? I don't know. Fortunately, though, the Blue Jay fans gave the Marine Corps a standing ovation before Game 3. Game 3 was crazy because that was when Devon White caught the ball in center field up against the wall, and then Pendleton and Sanders passed each other, which you can't do because one passed the other when the other one was the free runner. That was out number 2. And then Deion Sanders was supposed to be tagged out by Kelly Gruber on the heel, but somehow in some way he was called safe. The fans were revolting. That was a tag. Although Gruber should have thrown to second base because then they would have had Sanders. Nevertheless, Blue Jays ended up winning that game 2-1. Jimmy Key, in his final start as a Blue Jay, made it 3-1 for the Blue Jays, 7-2 in Game 5 for the Braves. Lonnie Smith with a grand slam. Back to Atlanta for Game 6, which was crazy as fuck. Blue Jays almost choked in the bottom of the ninth. They were up 4-3, and then Tom Henke airmailed a ball to the catcher. That could have ruined the game. Fortunately, though, it went to extra innings. Dave Winfield hit a 2-run double to left field. Braves scored a run, but fortunately for Toronto, Nixon bunted. Timlin saw the ball and threw it to Joe Carter. Game set match. The 92 World Series was coming north of the border. And number one, come on, you really think that the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays Momo Joe Carter was not going to be number one? What type of person are you? I'm sorry, but that's the way I roll. So anyway, as I look at, so I'm trying to organize my thoughts here. Oh, frick. Season. So anyway, as I'm just trying to set things up here. So yeah, Blue Jays in 93, they were an all-star team. Everyone forgets about the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays. Because the 1993 Toronto Blue Jays actually lost like 12 players off their roster. They lost Dave Winfield to his hometown Minnesota team. They lost Candy Maldonado, I can't remember where. They lost Kelly Gruber to the Angels. They lost Manny Lee to Texas. They lost Tom Henke to Texas. They lost Jimmy Key to the Yankees. They lost David Cone to Kansas City. They lost a lot of other relievers and all that. Fortunately, though, that the 93 Blue Jays got better. I mean, Pat Burns was still there. John Olerud was at first base for the time being. Robbie Elmer was still around. Third base was to Ed Sprague, and he did well. The outfield was Joe Carter, Devon White, and not Paul Molitor. Paul Molitor came in as his DH. Can't remember who the other outfielder is. Oh yeah, Ricky Henderson after that trade early in '93. Anyhow, the Blue Jays at shortstop, it was crazy. They had Dick Schofield Jr. However, he got hurt. The Blue Jays had to make a trade with the Mets to get Tony Fernandez back for Darren Jackson. It worked. And then, the Blue Jays were like an all-star team in all essence. The White Sox gave the Blue Jays fits, but the Jays won in 6 and then went to the World Series against the Phillies, who were the basically Modern House Gas House game after shocking Atlanta in the NLCS to go to the World Series. Jays and Phillies were split 1-1 after 2 games. Game 3 in Philly had a massive rain delay, but Paul Molitor came through after John Olerud was benched because no DH. It worked. Molitor did well. And then game 4 was that 15-14 massive game, in which the Blue Jays were down 14-9 in the 8th and came back to score 6 runs to make it 15-14. One game away, Curt Schilling pitched his heart out with a 5-hit shutout in game 5. And then game 6 was the big one for the Blue Jays as the Jays were up 5-1 thanks to a home run by one Paul Molitor, who was making his case to be World Series MVP after Pat Borders was the 92 World Series MVP. And then, of course, it was 5-1 and the Jays imploded in the 8th inning. We're down 6-5. They did make a mini rally, no runs, but as the one fan said in the World Series video, at least we got the top of the lineup coming up. Because, you had Henderson who drew a 4-pitch walk. You had Devon White making out. And then Paul Molitor got a base hit. And then that came up to Joe Carter. It was all up to Joe Carter to do it. With 2 runners on, he knew what to do. He swung at a terrible 2-1 pitch, and then, of course, came the 2-2. Now the 2-2. Line drive deep. Well, I feel way back and gone. Joe Carter with a 3-run home run. The winners and still world champions, the Toronto Blue Jays, as Sean McDonough on CBS would call it. Of course, Tom Cheek for Blue Jays Radio would say, Joe's had his moments. The swinging the belt deep to left field at the wall. Blue Jays win it. The Blue Jays win the World Series as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the bottom of the ninth Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life. And that was it. He didn't hit a bigger home run in his life. He couldn't have. I mean, he did what Bill Mazeroski in 1960 did, hit a home run to win the World Series. Mazeroski's was kind of better because there was a game 7 instead of game 6. But nevertheless, the Blue Jays won the World Series in '93. Canada went ballistic, and that was the last Canadian championship in any of the big four sports: baseball, basketball, football, hockey. Well, of course, football. We don't have an NFL team until 2019 when the Raptors pulled one out of the hat against Golden State. So happiness assured in Canada. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.